Welcome to another edition of Lakeville City Council Wrap-Up. During this program, we will highlight the agenda items presented to the Lakeville City Council at their June 2nd, 2014 meeting. First highlighted item on the agenda is item number 7, Dodd Crossing. And to give the background information on this agenda item is Planning Director Daryl Morey.
Pleased to be before you this evening with, in addition to the Autumn Meadows plat that Mr. Milkey described earlier, 2 new preliminary plats for the City Council. And as I was thinking about this particular plat on my way over to City Hall this evening, I was thinking a little bit about the history of that. Thank you, Mr. Milkey. This particular piece of property has a lot of history. I'm not going to bore you with all of the history of this. I did provide a bit of a diatribe at the Planning Commission meeting, public hearing a couple of weeks ago. If you're interested, you can go back and check the replay of that meeting. But this particular piece of property, while it hasn't had a lot of development proposals or opportunities recently, mainly due to the housing downturn, there were back in the roughly the mid 2000s, quite a few proposals that were before us conceptually. None of them ever went any farther than that. And all of them involved some form of commercial development. As you can see from the zoning map that I have on the screen, Exhibit A, it does show the C1 zone property that's in the very southeast corner of this particular plat. And there's a lot of history to that, and it pertains in large part to when Dodd Boulevard was realigned to intersect with Pilot Knob Road versus County Road 46. And the Retzikel family that owned the property at the time, and the county roads access spacing that was in place at the time. And the developers that looked at this never could quite get the commercial and the residential components to mix very well. And so the reason I'm mentioning this to you is because with the proposal that's before us this evening to rezone the property in conjunction with the development of the property, it makes a lot of sense. And staff strongly supports that. So the proposal in conjunction with the preliminary plats to rezone the C1 to RST2, so the entire roughly 31 acre parcel will be zoned RST2. And the proposal is for the single family lots as indicated by Ms. Carlson. 67 single family lots to be exact, 3 outlots. A couple of those outlots are pertaining to stormwater basins that will be constructed as part of this development. And I'm going to put the colored preliminary plat that Ms. Jensen was kind enough to put together. And then the other outlot is pertaining to a remnant parcel that was part of the old Dodd alignment when it cut through at an angle and intersected at County Road 46. The single most challenging aspect with the development of this property has been access. It is bounded on 3 sides by county roads. County Road 46 to the north, which has a very small frontage, Pilot Knob Road on the east, which is County Road 31, and then Dodd Boulevard or County Road 9 to the south. Another interesting aspect of this, and what is part of the variance proposal, is that there is a DNR designated tributary that runs through the property, generally in this location, and is therefore subject to shoreland overlay district requirements. That particular tributary has not daylighted in this area since the mid-1990s when, in conjunction with a City of Apple Valley project, that drainage area or tributary was placed underground into culverts. So one would ask, why is it even still listed as a DNR designated tributary? We posed that question to the DNR here a few weeks ago when this plat was coming forward, and we will continue to work with the DNR to see if we can get that designation taken off in this particular area, because it really doesn't make sense to have that be a designated tributary. But in the meantime, as that will take some time to work through, it does necessitate a variance for lot width, which for the RST2 single family standards is 70 feet. The DNR Shoreland requirements is 75, so there's a 5-foot difference. And then the impervious surface coverage requirement is 25% for those lots, a maximum for those lots within the Shoreland Overlay District, which is highlighted with this black dashed line. And the RST2 single-family allowance is 40%. So there's a little bit of a dichotomy between what the straight zoning standard for RST2 allows and what the Shoreland would allow, again, using that classification. So I deviated a little bit from my script this evening, but in conjunction with this preliminary plat, that's one action. You have a comprehensive plan amendment to change the commercial guided land to low-medium density, the rezoning from C1 to RST2, and then again this variance for related to the Shoreland Overlay District. A couple of things I do want to point out before I conclude. The developer did host a neighborhood meeting on this particular proposal on April 8th, which was attended by 16 residents. They also, Planning Commission held a public hearing on the applications at their May 22nd meeting. There were 5 neighbors that spoke at that meeting, plus one that submitted an email comments in advance of the meeting. A number of questions were raised, some concerns were raised. I think the predominant concern that was raised by the neighbors was the potential for cut-through traffic from this development through the Dodd Point neighborhood, which lies to the northwest. It doesn't show entirely on this particular plan, but the street system that continues to the northwest and exits or accesses out to County Road 46. And again, because this development only has one full access opportunity at Dodd Lane, which is a city street, it really makes this a very challenging site to develop. This particular Elm Creek Lane connection to Dodd Boulevard, much like Aronson Bluff over on 50 just east of City Hall here, about a year or so ago, will have a paved connection to Dodd, but because the county won't allow that access until Dodd Boulevard is upgraded to a divided roadway, because their access spacing calls for right in, right out there, that access connection to Dodd will be gated and will be for emergency service vehicles only, again, until such time as Dodd is upgraded and a median is constructed. So I think that covers the major points related to this proposed preliminary plat and the various actions associated with it. The Planning Commission did unanimously recommend approval of the preliminary plat, as did the Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Committee. Staff is recommending approval of the preliminary plat, the comprehensive plan amendment, the ordinance rezoning the property, and the variance, subject to the 9 stipulations listed in the May 19th planning report, and also adoption of the findings of fact. And I can stand for questions.
Item number 7 was approved by the Lakeville City Council. Next highlighted item on the agenda is item number 8, Cedar Landing, preliminary plat and ordinance rezoning property. And once again, to give the background information on this agenda item is Planning Director Daryl Morey.
Probably don't have as much to say. Ms. Rust was very complete in her presentation. This, as identified, subject site is located between Cedar and Hamburg Avenues and north of 210th Street. You can see there's an existing homestead and outbuildings on the property that will be removed with the development. Well and septic will be abandoned, any hazardous material removed. This is 98 single-family lots, as was mentioned, 45 detached townhome units. There's 4 common area HOA lots and 7 outlots. Like the preliminary plat before this one, this property has 2 different zonings as well. Approximately 2/3 of the property is zoned RST2, the westerly portion, and then the easterly portion adjacent to Cedar Avenue is zoned RM1. The product type that Ryland is proposing here for the 2 neighborhoods, as was described, the smaller lot, single family on the west half, is a permitted use in the RST2. The detached townhomes on the easterly portion is a permitted use within the RM2. However, the developer prefers to have one unified zoning, so they're requesting the rezoning of the easterly portion from RM2 to RST2, and that makes sense to have that continuity in zoning. The site is approximately 60 acres. As Ms. Rust identified and as shown on the preliminary plat, there is an area for future neighborhood park, part of which would be dedicated with the Cedar Landing development, and the remainder when the property to the north develops as well. As you can see from the preliminary plat, they're proposing a landscape buffer along 210th Street and also along Cedar Avenue, in addition to landscaping that will be provided internally within the development. And as Councilmember LeBeau mentioned about the detached townhomes, is something that our comprehensive plan and zoning has been encouraging for quite some time, and this is really the first substantial detached townhome development that the city has seen since the housing downturn here from a few years ago. So it's good to see that that product is being added to the city's stock. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on this particular application, the preliminary plat and the rezoning, at their May 22nd meeting, and they unanimously recommended approval. Public comment was received in the form of an email that day from a neighboring property owner to the south of 210th Street. That email was provided to the Planning Commission for their meeting and is also included in your packet as well. The Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Committee also unanimously recommended approval of the preliminary plat, and staff is recommending approval of the preliminary plat and the ordinance rezoning the property from RM2 to RST2, subject to the 12 stipulations which are listed in the May 15th planning report, and also adoption of the findings of fact. I can also stand for questions.
Item number 8 was approved by the Lakeville City Council. Next highlighted item on the agenda is item number 9, consider ordinance amending outdoor patios. And to provide the background information on this agenda item is Community and Economic Development Director Dave Olson.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. This is an item that's been before the council on a couple of different occasions at work session discussions, both on April 28th and May 12th. And it initiated as a request from the owners of Carboni's Pizza, located in the Lakeville Crossing Shopping Center at 160th and Cedar Avenue, also known as Cedar Avenue and County Road 46. The city of Lakeville has different standards for outdoor patios that are licensed, that are located within 150 feet of a residential district, and this was incorporated into the ordinance when it was drafted initially and adopted by council approximately 5 or 6 years ago. And it limits the hours of operation of those patios to 10 p.m. any day of the week. So that's what's before the council. That is what's being requested to be considered by the council by the owners of our Carboni's Pizza. Babe's Sports Bar has also expressed interest. However, they did not submit a formal request like the owners of Carboni's did, and as well as the request came from both the Carboni's and the ownership of Lakeville Crossing Shopping Center. Based on the discussions that were had at the work session, staff was directed to prepare a proposed ordinance amendment that would extend hours of operation for patios within 150 feet of residential district to 11 o'clock on Sunday through Thursday evenings, and until midnight on Saturday and Sunday evenings, which is extending by 1 hour for 5 days of the week and 2 hours for the weekends. And that is the ordinance that was drafted at the second and discussed briefly at the second work session on May 12th. It was also the council direction and staff's recommendation that we send out information of these proposed changes to the residential areas that would be impacted by this. So approximately 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago I should say, notices of the proposed change were sent to property owners within 150 feet of the 2 licensed establishments. Included in your packets were a number of the responses, both letters and emails that were received. Some of those were received from property owners beyond the 150 feet that became aware of it. And I know there are a number of those people in attendance at tonight's meeting. Staff also responded to phone calls and answered a number of questions over the phone from some of those residents. The issue of, and the mayor requested that I address the issue of the city's noise ordinance. The original ordinance was drafted somewhat, the 10 o'clock limitation, I should say, was drafted somewhat with the city's noise ordinance in mind. Right now, the allowed noise level that can be emitted from any property in the city, be it residential or commercial, is 65 decibels until 10 p.m. at night. And then at 10 p.m. at night, it drops down to 55 decibels. So the idea being, and that was one of the rationales that was used in coming up with the 10 o'clock time frame. So the ordinance, if it were to be, if any changes were to be made, that noise ordinance would still apply, whether it was specifically addressed, and it is addressed by reference in the existing part of the patio ordinance. It's not proposed to be changed, but it would certainly be possible to make it more restrictive or more specific, i.e., live music or any other amplified music, after a certain time would be consistent with the city's current noise ordinance, which limits and requires noise levels to go down after 10 p.m. So with that, I'll certainly stand for any questions, but that's kind of the information that we've put together, and nothing really new other than the fact that some of the residential homeowners have been notified since the last time it was discussed at a work session.
Item number 9 was tabled by the City Council for future council consideration. Next highlighted item on the agenda is item number 10, consider proposal from Short, Elliott, Hendrickson Incorporated to design traffic control signal system on Ipava Avenue. And to give the background information on this agenda item is Public Works Director Chris Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Earlier, you had an explanation of one item on your consent agenda from the city administrator regarding changes to the 50/60 joint powers agreement. And this is directly related to that, the signal project, as Mr. Milkey had referenced. First, just very briefly, I know the council is aware of the background. CSA 50 and 60 is scheduled for a roundabout and highway expansion. Intersection is scheduled to be closed in 2015. What we do know is county roads being closed lead to indirect routes when that closure occurs, and local collectors will be quicker and a likely alternative. The city and Dakota County took part in a traffic diversion study as part of this project, and again, I know council is very aware of this as we presented at a work session, but it was to evaluate the impact of the CSA 50/60 closure, conditions on key routes, also to estimate the increased and or decreased traffic volumes and recommend improvements to reduce delays and backups, as well as provide some safety enhancements if possible. The results were presented, as I already mentioned, to the City Council at a March 24th work session. What we found after completing the traffic diversion study is that Ipava Avenue would be likely used as an alternate route for the closure. Our current daily traffic volumes are between, depending on what segment of Ipava you're on, between 8,300 and 8,900 trips per day. With the closure, that ADT is projected to increase between 13,000 and 17,000 trips per day, so a fairly significant increase. What we saw, just to give the council an idea, because I know you received some feedback with the Dodd Highview closure last year, what we saw in Ipava was somewhere around 12 to 14,000 trips per day. So that puts that in some type of context for all of you. So recommendations from the traffic mitigation or traffic diversion study. Here's some traffic mitigation improvements, and those are a temporary traffic signal at 165th Street and a temporary traffic signal at 175th Street. And those are the two key things identified. We also talked earlier on the joint powers agreement with some turn lanes along Kenrick Avenue, but of course that's separate from this, and we'll be working with Dakota County and our contractor that we're currently working with to do some overlay work on Kenrick on that particular project. But the other bullet point there is the existing intersection layout is designed for an efficient transition to a permanent signal system at 175th. 165th, however, of course, if you travel that, is not necessarily set up with the road geometry and configuration. So, moving forward with this, we would expect that at tonight's meeting we could award a design contract to SEH. By August, approve plans. By October, do a bid opening, and by late October, begin construction. March 17th, signals in operation, and then of course the closure is slated for sometime in April of 2015 that would begin. So staff recommendations would be to move forward with the work that SEH would do and install a permanent traffic signal at 175th Street in Ipava. And then at 165th Street, we'd like to move forward with actually an intersection control evaluation. That's part of the scope of work. And pending the study results, we'd install a permanent traffic signal or plan for a roundabout on 165th. That still would not prevent us from at least moving forward initially with the intention to do a temporary signal. However, if the results of that intersection control evaluation come back, we look to at the June, not June, but July work session, we'd likely come back to the council and want to discuss further improvements at 165th. In fact, if it led us to believe that a more permanent solution was needed there. So with that, we just ask the council to approve a proposal from SCH to design the traffic control systems on Ipava at both 175th and 165th Street.
Item number 10 was approved by the Lakeville City Council. Next highlighted item on the agenda was item number 11, consider real estate purchase agreement with Lakeville Land Limited. And to give the information regarding this agenda item is Liquor Operations Manager Brenda Visnovic.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, council members. Last, at the May 19th council meeting, a purchase agreement for land out at County Road 70 was made with Lakeville Land Limited. Now with that, City Council asked us to provide a stipulation back towards the buyer based on some covenants. Unfortunately, the three of us who were negotiating the terms of this agreement were not present to state that that stipulation had already been somewhat offered and tried. But with that said, some subsequent discussions with the seller resulted in which we can provide plans to him during the due diligence period, which is now in place, and that he would approve plans of a current existing building of our own. And with that, we would be able to move ahead with this land agreement as stated. With that, are there any questions?
Item number 11 was approved by the Lakeville City Council. Well, those were the highlighted items presented to the council at their June 2nd, 2014 meeting. If you have any questions or comments regarding these agenda items, please feel free to call City Hall. The number is 952-985-4400. Thanks for watching this edition of Lakeville City Council Wrap-Up. There comes a time when brews must do battle. Hence, the Brew Battle was born. Join us on Saturday, July 12th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Lakeville Area Arts Center. Watch as 30 breweries featuring over 100 brews do battle until a champion has been crowned. Shuttle buses will be provided. Check out details at www.lakevillemn.gov. Don't miss Lakeville's Brew Battle.